Welcome to Sermon Brainwave with me, Rolf Jacobson.
And me, Matt Skinner.
And me, Karoline Lewis.
These are the texts for the seventh Sunday after Epiphany, February 23rd, 2025. The first reading is Genesis 45, 3 through 11 and 15. Psalm 37, 1 through 11 and 39 and 40. 1 Corinthians 15, selected verses 35 through 38 and 42 to 50. And then finally, Luke 6, 27 through 38.
Did you mean finally, like this is the last reading, or finally we're getting to Luke 6, 27 to 38?
Yeah, I kind of meant that.
Or maybe both.
Maybe I was done reading the texts.
Well, we are continuing with the Sermon on the Plain, or the Sermon on the Level Place. And so that's important to remember, because there are a couple of verses in here that are frequently, might we say, taken out of their narrative context in terms of morals or righteous ways to live. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You know, things like that.
Does that make it easier when you take it out of context?
I remember when I was a youth director saying to a group, is there anything you don't like about Jesus? And they said, yeah. He says, I have to love my enemies.
Yeah. Well, that's another one.
I think that they pretty much got that. They understood correctly.
Well, no, I don't think it does I don't think it makes it any easier to take it out of context, but what difference does it make to put it back into context? That's my point. In the larger scheme of Luke and this Sermon on the Plain and the coming off the Beatitudes, and really the way I think verse 36 is very important, because that claim about be merciful as your Father is merciful should take one back to the Magnificat, where Mary talks about, gives witness to God's mercy, that what she's experienced is God's mercy. So how is it that her experience of that mercy is then brought forward to so much of what is being said here? That how is God's mercy, the concept of mercy, God's mercifulness, now Jesus is interpreting in this context after listening to his mother for 30 years. Just saying.
And calling home frequently.
Mom. Hey, Mom.
I think some of the teachings here, their parallels in Matthew are a little tamer. They're really hard here in Luke. The teachings in the first paragraph about non-retaliation are very difficult to live out, and people always want to jump to, and for good reason, well, what about people in these circumstances? And obviously there's circumstances where it's different. In all of these teachings, one of the things that holds them together is interaction with others. Like, none of these imagine life lived in isolation. None of these imagine a kind of moral self that isn't deeply engaged with others financially, relationally, in terms of power, inequities, or responsibilities. And so that's interesting as well, right? That what he's getting at here are the ways in which we all exist and operate within societies and groups.
Mm-hmm.
You are committed to nonviolence, though.
Until you hit me.
Well, I'm not going to hit you.
I'm not going to talk about like a principled, not like the peace churches.
Not like the Mennonites?
I've never been tested like that. Yeah.
Okay.
But no, in general,
not like James
I
Logan.
like to think. I would like.
No, I'm holding you up. I just know that you're committed to nonviolence, and that is actually the Christian way of life. Now, can a nation that has a lot of Christians as a nation be not have an army or not have a defense? We're not saying that.
Church has been trying to figure that out for 2,000 years, right?
Ask Augustine.
Right.
But as a way of life, the verse, that first paragraph, at least the way the editors had divided it here, verses 27 through 31, it's love everybody, including those who hate you and actively wish you ill. Live a life of nonviolence and non-retaliation and generosity. That's not bad.
none of it's bad. It's just hard, right? So
Oh, yeah.
the reason I backed off when you said you're committed to nonviolence is because if you announce that, then people start taking advantage of you. So I don't want someone to walk up to me at a conference and start pushing me around thinking I might not snap.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to announce that.
If you see me at the Festival of Homiletics, just keep a wide berth.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. Hard text. But maybe it's supposed to be hard, to quote A League of Their Own.
Or to quote my trainer, if it were easy, if it weren't hard, everybody would be doing it.
That's from A League of Their Own. Your trainer has ripped off Tom Hanks.
Oh, well, I don't know. It sounds better when my trainer says
Tom
it.
Hanks.
And I'm trying to deadlift.
What about the forgiveness part of this passage and linking it with the story of Joseph? Because what the Old Testament does here is give you a narrative, a story, and everybody stores their memories in stories rather than in maxims. So Jesus has a list of maxims here, including forgive and you will be forgiven. But then the story of Joseph, and then what you can't just read chapter 45. Most people won't know enough of the story, but it's in there, and then you tell the whole story, a story about forgiveness from the Bible, and those stories then give you enough tags to retain the good news of it, which, of course, as a Lutheran, after telling a story about how you got to forgive people, I will remind people that God forgives us. God forgives you. Just because I don't want to end on I don't want to end with exhortation, whiny exhortation, but rather with a firm promise.
Yeah, a couple of things, right? To note the way in which Jesus occasionally roots these commands in God's own character and God's own mercy. We've talked about that. I think don't miss that if you're preaching this. This is not just good behavior or good ethics disembodied somehow or disconnected from God. The other thing I think I would want to think about, and you have to tell me if this is like weaseling out, but part of this is addressed to groups and to communities too. And so in other words, this is Jesus telling you, Karoline, don't judge, and you, Rolf, forgive people. But it's also saying the church should be a community that learns together how to practice forgiveness and non-judgment, which is easier for me because there's some things I probably can't forgive. I know there's some people that I have friends who have things that they can't forgive or can't fully forgive, or it's a real trauma to go there. But they can situate themselves in a community that recognizes the importance of forgiveness and works on that. You know what I mean? Like
that these verbs are plural.
Correct.
Imperatives. They're not singular. So that you are part of a community that does that. That's really helpful.
So what does it mean for the church to be a place that works together to love enemies, knowing that there's some enemies I have a really hard time loving? Am I wimping out?
No, I think that's true. And I also think verse 27 sort of sets that up because, of course, this is coming, off the heels of the woes, right? Jesus hasn't stopped talking. And then you get verse 27, but I say to you that listen, or but I say to you who are listening, or maybe I say to you who are still listening.
Anybody
right?
there? Anybody there?
Anybody there? I mean, seriously, I think it's it's a really important segue. Are you still listening to what I have to say? Because I'm going to keep going. And this is in part what the blessings and the woes look like, right? That how do they look like in community? What do they embody in this community or this kingdom of God that we're trying to live out? And this is a lot of what, to put it in the wider context of Luke, this happens to Jesus in Nazareth, right? Where he has this lovely sermon from Isaiah, and then he goes on, and then people want to throw him off a cliff. And so for me, it tells a lot of truth about the human condition of what we can tolerate, what we can swallow, and what we can't, and what's the rub, and there, it's not just a few things here, there are a lot of things here. And so the fact that it is to this great number of disciples, right, then is important about, we don't do this on our own. If we did, there's just no way, absolutely no way I could do any of this on my own. I can barely do any of it, period, but I can't do it on my own.
I agree with all that. I do want to say one thing about verse 38, which I think people will take out of context. And again, this is plural, translated in the NRSV as, for the measure you give will be the measure you get back. And when thinking about the church offering, and there are the prosperity gospel churches, if I understand them correctly, do kind of take this out of context and say, hey, give to this church and you'll get more back. And that's not true. That this is not a Ponzi scheme. The church is not a Ponzi scheme or pyramid. And if you give money to the church, you will have less money, but you'll be participating in a mission bigger than yourself. I think that's the message, and to make sure that people don't misinterpret this.
So, Genesis 45.
I don't know if you want to say much more than I already said, but the Joseph novella or story, the longest, it's this long arc. It's not the longest, but in Genesis, all the way from 37, 38's different, but then 39 through 50, it's this long arc. And it's the story of unimaginable violence done by one set of siblings, all brothers in this case, to another, a brother, and then how it ends with forgiveness and reconciliation. So much so, of course, that some people can't believe it ever happened. But what if it did? Or what if it doesn't matter if it did? And it's really the truth, that this is how families and communities are to live together. Now, could you forgive this sin? I probably couldn't. I'm still mad about the big wheel when I was a kid, Not really.
Why?
Because I didn't get one.
Oh.
So that's really about my parents, not
Yeah.
my brother. Mm-hmm. But I have very good relationship with my sisters and had a great one with my brother. And so I don't have this problem, but all of us know people and have been swept into dramas where families fall apart or friendships fall apart and end up in enmity. And the drama of the Joseph story really is of God mending and bring about healing so that there's not only reconciliation, but a future together.
Which is a good point if you're going to talk about forgiveness in your sermon. And it's not forgiving others so that you can say, okay, I did that, God. Are you happy now? But
happy now, God?
Right. But there is a future together or a promise together. It might not be the same as what it was, right? It doesn't mean going back to where you were, but it's opening up a new future that's possible.
Well, and that is so much of the text, right? God, 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 God. I mean, it's not I.
You're talking about the Bible as a whole?
No, I'm talking about
see.
This text. It's not like I did this, but it's God, God, God. And so it's about Joseph giving witness to God's presence. And as you just said, Rolf, how is God active in the reconciliation of this family? Not necessarily what Joseph did.
Sorry, I was confusing the two texts.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Sometimes I think a key in these reconciliations, which can happen late in life, and I've experienced those in my extended family, is the person who feels ostracized or hurt or judged, recognizing that the other people also have experienced those things too, and so that they're not alone in feeling whatever they're feeling.
So how are you connecting the psalm?
Well, I don't know. How am I connecting the psalm?
Yeah, or do we connect the psalm or not connect the psalm? Or
Well, the psalm's supposed to interpret the Old Testament reading somehow.
It's supposed to usually be some sort of liturgical response. And, I think it's about
vindication.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And about, refrain from anger, forsake wrath, do not fret, all those sorts of wisdom literature things. And of course, verse 11 sounds a lot like something Jesus says, the meek shall inherit the earth.
And delight themselves in abundant prosperity.
I have a question, however.
Yeah.
If there was a psalm scholar in the room.
Hmm.
What does
If
verse
only.
4 mean?
What?
What does verse 4 mean? Take delight in the Lord, and the Lord will give you the desires of your heart. What's the heart? What's that notion of delight and desire?
The heart is usually considered to be the seat of the intellect in Hebrew, but it's not quite as. There is an element of the human heart, like emotions. The emotions are usually it's your gut or something in Hebrew. I think these are just a sort of a wisdom set of maxims, and I do think one of the things that I really appreciate lately about Psalms, I mentioned Psalm 27 maybe last week or the week before, is the idea of delighting in the Lord or seeking the Lord's beauty. I mean, the concepts we don't often think about. And I'm not sure if this is causal. Take delight in the Lord and he will give you. But rather, take delight in the Lord, period. The Lord will give you the desires of your heart. I mean, it's not necessarily, hey, if you do this,
If you
you'll
do
get
this,
that.
then, yeah.
It's more,
Yeah.
these are, it's all just the word and which is infinitely flexible in Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to say that part of this is when you delight in the Lord, that will also, it's going to train your heart. It's going to train the way you think. It's going to train what you crave. It's going to train what you love. It's going to, you see what I mean?
That's exactly
that's
right.
the beginning. And then,
Yeah.
see what I mean?
For us, it's what
it's like
happens.
when Jesus says, where your treasure is, your heart will be, right?
And what happens when the narrative of the life of Jesus becomes the thing that shapes you and shapes what you desire. That by grounding ourselves over and over and evermore in the story of the crucified and risen one, this is just what happens.
But then to ground that in delight as opposed to fear, grudging obligation, whatever, because people are going to hear Luke 6 and think this is too hard or this God's too demanding,
judgment.
right?
Yeah. So where you start is important.
Yeah. I just wonder where that notion of delight, or how that can possibly help us with Luke 6, so we don't come away from Luke 6 just terrified.
Or could the delight be connected to blessedness? The way in which blessedness is, I wonder if that could be another way to think about, blessed are you, I take delight in you, or,
It's a good word. We don't talk about it much in church when things aren't going well. We tend to we have heavier emotions we talk about.
Yep.
I like delight.
Well, what about, we're speaking of delight, 1 Corinthians 15.
Yeah, verse 36, fool!
Fool!
It is a great word,
He's writing to friends. Remember this, too.
Well,
or at least people he knows. Maybe not friends.
Well, how about this? He's writing to preachers that think they know too much about what the resurrected body and life will be about.
But I think, don't you think that there are a lot of preachers, preachers out there who are listening? Anybody listening? Anybody still listening?
I'm here. Ralph's here. We got you.
Anyone? Bueller?
Is anyone still Bueller? But someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body do they come? And I think there are some preachers out there, I'm guessing, who have had these questions and they wish they could say, fool!
Well,
because you're going on about how, wonderful resurrection is, and then somebody says, well, what body? And how is that going to happen?
Yeah.
And what's my body going to be like? And is it just going to be a soul? And am I going to be lost 50 pounds? And I'm just acknowledging that maybe you wouldn't want to say fool, but you could say it in your mind.
I like that.
You could say it to yourself.
So, Matt, you said before we hit record, we need one more week of 1 Corinthians 15 because of the way where it really should go. You really should read at least through the exclamation point. This is the week that stops in verse 50, which sets up. It's like, there's no. What if the fireworks display didn't have a finale?
Yeah, he says, well, here's how it's going to happen. You need to be transformed. But then we never get to the part where he says, and guess what? I tell you a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which
will all be changed.
I think you gotta, if you're you gotta add the verses.
You too. I'm not saying you add 39 through 41, to be clear.
No.
After this.
51 through 50.
Although 39 through 41 are a
51
hoot.
through 57. Yeah.
39 through 41 are a lot of fun.
No, listen, There's so much to love.
Don't you want me to read them?
Yes. No.
There is one flesh for human beings, another for animals, another for birds, and another for fish. Sorry.
That's the answer you can give the person who says, well, what kind of body?
Fool!
do they
No,
have? Fool!
Well, this is important, right? Ancient Greeks believe
Oh, that's
different bodies.
Oh, a sermon on the difference between ancient Greek beliefs and Christian beliefs. That's gonna
Exactly. No, but the
That's gonna be
bodies,
awesome.
there are certain things, so fish need fish bodies. You need a fish body to survive in the ocean. A bird needs a flying body. And so the idea is, and the commentary works some of this out, you need a different kind of body if you're going to inherit
Eternal
imperishability.
life.
Right. But good news is you're going to get one. And it's going to be, this is where Paul falls a little short of giving a really clear explanation, because if he did, fool. And the commentary is helpful here, right? The soma psychikon and the soma pneumatikon, right? The idea of a body that's animated by not just spirit, but I would say by, guess which spirit?
The Holy Spirit.
Exactly right.
Sermon Brainwave is a production of Luther Seminary's Working Preacher. Working Preacher has been a trusted source of inspiration, interpretation, and imagination for preachers worldwide since 2007. Find episodes and links at workingpreacher.org/brainwave. And be sure to like, rate, subscribe, and comment on YouTube. Thanks for joining us.